After the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday, February 18th, I introduced myself to the three Board of Supervisors and
Lee Dimmitt.
down with me for an episode. And I'm telling you, it's like 32 minutes of podcast excellence, so hold on tight. This episode is brought to you by Griner Auto Body of Washington, Iowa, using state-of-the-art techniques and decades of experience to get your car back on the road after an accident. Car Doctor of Washington, Iowa. No matter who Frankensteined it, they can fix and clean and customize it. McDonald Boneyard of Keota, Iowa, for all of your farm equipment and auto recycling needs. Hinshaw Trailer Sales of Richland, Iowa. You need a trailer? They've got your trailer, and they fix what they sell and don't in their full-time repair shop. Girling Repair of Winfield, Iowa. If your mower is dead, call Fred, your Husqvarna, Aaron's, and Gravely dealer. Fred also fixes and sells snowblowers. B&B Propane and the family of Jet Stops. The Dutch Market and Coffee Talk of Washington, Iowa. The Dutch Market's got all your grocery needs taken care of for you, and they even let you reserve and use a conference room for free. And Dutch, I just talked about Dutch Market. And Coffee Talk, their drive-thru's open. You can pull right up and get a hot coffee today, an energy drink, a baked good, a sandwich, even ice cream. And they all present the award-winning Southeast Iowa Today. I'm John Bain, author of Christie's Journey, The Beat Goes On, and your host. Let's go talk with Lee. Lee, thanks so much for being on the program today.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, this is a wonderful opportunity for me as well. I just recorded Board of Supervisors meeting here on February 18th. It got delayed the day because of President's Day was yesterday, and colder than all the cliches or the sayings that go with it. It's cold out there. I think it was like -11 when I last checked on my car.
Well, it gets below 70 degrees. I get long underwear on, so I can tell you, this is not my cup of tea.
I don't know whose cup of tea it is. Anybody that says they like this stuff, I kind of wonder about them.
I'm right there with you. I'm a warm weather person. Yeah. There's no place I'd rather be in the spring, the summer, and the fall. But there's a lot of places I'd rather be come wintertime.
I agree. Well, I recorded that Board of Supervisors meeting today. You had the other supervisors in attendance as well. And after the meeting, we kind of introduced ourselves, and you said, you ever want to do a podcast? I got some stuff we could talk about. And I'm like, well, I want to do a podcast right now. So here we are.
Yep.
So today, for example, obviously with being on the Board of Supervisors for Jefferson County here and here at the Fairfield court, and we're at the courthouse in Fairfield, you deal with the county treasury as far as a lot of dollars that you and your co-supervisors have to manage and make decisions on. And we had examples of that today. There was a gentleman from the roads department, engineering department, and there was a gentleman here from conservation today. And let's just kind of follow up and kind of just go with, that lead there.
Well, we are currently in our budget process, if you will, and it's kind of long and drawn out. We start right at the first of the year after everybody's sworn in, and so through the process, one of the things that we determine is we meet with each department head. Some are elected officials, some are just department heads that are not elected, to review their budgets that they submit to us. And during that process, we ask questions and determine whether or not there's any places that they can cut, what it's going to look like, and we'll ask questions if something, say, for example, is it really necessary to buy this widget this year? Mm-hmm. We look at, our auditor's office provides to us just wonderful data that tells us what our ending fund balances are looking like moving through this current fiscal year that we're in. And so what we would have to start with. We never spend all our money. We have 4 funds. We have general basic, general supplemental, rural basic, and the roads fund. And then we also have a debt levy. We're very light on debt, which is a good thing. And when we say levies, that's each fund, general basic, rural basic, and the others, have their own levy, and that is levied against the taxable value of property. So as we go through the budget process, one of the things that we ask the departments to do is to submit a budget that includes pay raises, though what they're anticipating or what they would like to have or whatever, and that takes into account IPERS and Social Security, because that's part of the salary structure. A lot of times people don't think about that, but we have to think about it in terms of if I'm paying you $50,000 a year actual wages, well, I'm also paying another 10% a year, round figures, just another 10% for IPERS and another 7.5%, 7.6% for Social Security. So it's not just the $50,000 that increases. And as is always the case, everybody here that works here at the county, they're phenomenal individuals, great people, and do a tremendous job. And they pay for the same $6 a dozen eggs that everybody else does. They pay property taxes like everybody else does. And so their costs of living go up as well. Last year, we didn't give any pay raise. The previous year, we gave a fairly significant pay raise. And we were subject 2 years ago to state law using what was called a compensation board. And so it's a little different this year than that. Even though there's still a comp board, the state law changed, gives supervisors much more flexibility. So as we look at things, since we didn't give zero last year, we looked at pay raises for this year, and we established what we thought they should be, and all of the budgets should reflect that. We have some departments that have their own board by Iowa code, and those boards are autonomous. So they make decisions that the Board of Supervisors cannot control nor have input in. And so consequently, hypothetically, Department X can give pay raises, higher or lower, depending upon what that particular board decides they want to do. Where the Board of Supervisors comes in is we determine how much money we're going to appropriate to that department. So I'm just hypothetical number here. We're going to say they've got a $150,000 budget that they've submitted, and we're saying we're going to give you $100,000. You got to find $50,000 somewhere else. So then if they get crazy during the course of the fiscal year and they spend money on some widgets that they really didn't need, and then they come to us in the middle of the fiscal year and say, hey, we need a budget amendment, the Board of Supervisors can do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Excuse me. That's the control, that's the jurisdiction of the budget that the Board of Supervisors have.
Well, it's putting parameters for the Board of Supervisors to work within a budget, but then it's also putting those individual departments. They get their say, but they only get so much in the budget, and you need to figure out how to stretch that for the year.
Right, exactly. And now there are extenuating circumstances. You heard a little bit earlier that our county engineer indicated that he was getting $200,000 roughly in revenue that he didn't budget for because things came in at a lower cost. So he wants to buy more rock. But for him to have the authority to spend that under the way that we do things, we have to do a budget amendment. So a budget amendment doesn't always necessarily mean we're going to give you more money. A budget amendment can mean that you received revenue that you didn't anticipate, but to have the authority to use that revenue, we have to do a budget amendment.
So how does the road crew come on such a good fortune? How does that happen?
So a lot of times we submit projects for bids, and the costs come in lower than what the bids were estimated, so what was appropriated. And so they'll also qualify for, I'm going to use the term rebates, but refunds or whatever, which in this case was exactly what happened. They got some additional revenue from outside or external sources,
Gotcha.
and that they didn't anticipate.
And that's something that's important for someone, in the public that isn't in the course of county business every day, but they know their property tax goes for it and stuff. That's important for them to know that these people that are in charge of these departments are constantly working and finessing their budget and making it stretch out that 12 months. And when is the end of the fiscal year?
Fiscal years run from July 1st to June 30th.
Okay, so and someone sitting at home watching this, their fiscal year is the beginning of the year to December 31st, and then they pay their taxes by April 15th or whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot of them are paying their taxes throughout the process, and then hoping for a refund. And those are the folks that live that way, that they should have been paying more in their taxes so that they don't have the government sitting on their money that whole time.
Right. And it's, and in our case, or in the case of our engineer, he indicated that he was going to purchase more rock, which is always needed. We don't get near the rock out on the roads that we'd like to get out on the roads. And so when an opportunity arises to be able to do that without any additional expense to the taxpayers, that's a win-win.
Someday I want to ask someone from the road crew, has the original gravel that was put down made it to China by now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you would ask that. Just real quickly as a sidebar. We used to purchase rock that had a lot of fines in it. And when it would rain, it was like a pudding.
Okay.
And it was a very soft rock. It met state specs, but it was a very soft rock. So it would get pulverized very easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so previous engineer and I had a conversation years ago and said, hey, we're not buying this rock anymore. We need a harder rock because it ends up disappearing.
Right.
And so those are things that you learn too about your product that you're getting. And we submit bids or what we call requests for proposals for bids for rock. But we're pretty much a captive audience on rock anymore because, as is the case with lots and lots of businesses and industries, quarries have merged and bought and sold, and so we're kind of restricted to
competition. Isn't as much in price.
That's right,
yeah.
Exactly. And you talked about, you heard him say earlier about some bridge work that was going to be done, and he had two companies that were relatively speaking local, so that's basically the only ones that we're going to hear from, and that's and that, it is what it is. And all of our costs, we were talking earlier about the budgets and that sort of thing, our costs don't ever remain stagnant. And so it costs more for health insurance each year, costs more for, I'll give you an example, this current fiscal year that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
Our liability insurance for our buildings and our vehicles and our personnel, the premium increased by $122,000. That's not the premium. That was the increase.
Wow.
Now, for this next fiscal year, we're not anywhere near that, which, knock on wood, I'm very grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
This year, or this next fiscal year, we're looking at less than a 3% increase in our health insurance premium. Great news.
That is.
We've got a company that we do business with called EBS, which stands for Employee Benefit Systems. Denise Ballard is our broker. Phenomenal lady. She just does yeoman's work and kind of keep our insurance premiums at a minimum, and she does a tremendous job. So all of these kind of things that we take into consideration. Having to buy new equipment. Do we have to buy new equipment every year? Not necessarily every year, but we also have to be cognizant that each year that we don't replace equipment, the equipment's going to get more expensive, and you don't want to get to a point where all of a sudden you need to replace 3 or 4 maintainers all at one time.
Right.
So we try to be.
What's one of those cost?
$350,000. Yeah. I've got 3 ambulances. We just started an ambulance department a year ago, October. And we just literally, when we started in October of 23, We had just purchased a third ambulance, and that ambulance cost us $250,000.
Wow.
And so the point is that maintaining these services are very expensive. And we are not paying our medics and our EMTs an inordinate amount of money. My average EMT gets $18 an hour. That's pretty hard to make ends meet on $18 an hour.
Yeah.
Yes, they get, if they're full-time, they work what we call 224s in a week. So in a pay period, they'll get 16 hours of overtime. But at $18 an hour with 16 hours of overtime every pay period, they make $48,000 a year.
And I say, and in that situation, Uncle Sam is more happy than they are.
Right.
Because Uncle Sam will get most of that.
Exactly right. And so our people are not overpaid. I know that folks sometimes tend to look at it and say, well, boy, if I had a county job or an opportunity, and I get it, and it's a great place to work. But I caution people that it is not getting overpaid by any stretch of the imagination. Their wages have not necessarily kept up with inflation, especially when you get 0% pay increase. And then as we've indicated, we are subject to state law. Employees don't necessarily want to hear that. I understand it, but we don't have an option in that regard. So we have to try and deal with state senators and state representatives and governors who, and I'm not finding fault with any of them, I'm just simply saying that they hear from the constituents that our property taxes are too high, so they take steps to try and remedy that because they want to get reelected.
Right.
So we are forced then to live within parameters that they themselves can't live within. And
funny how that works.
It is. And we talked about it. I'll just give the viewers some examples. Okay, we, round figures, we appropriate $50,000 a year to the Iowa Department of Human Services here in Jefferson County because the code says we have to. The code says we have to give $44,000 a year to the Fairfield Public Library. We give $140,000 a year for court services. I explained to you a little bit earlier that we had a couple of juveniles that we had to house down in Montrose for a couple of years at $11,000 a month. We had to pay for, not the state.
Wow.
They get the best health care. We're owed well over $1 million in jail room and board that we can't collect. The state does not help us in the least in that regard. In fact, the Iowa Code, you can look it up and see. Anybody can look it up for themselves. It's 25B.2 of the Iowa Code. The law was passed in 1994 that says that there can be no unfunded state mandates except IPERS, which is the Iowa Public Employees Retirement System. Every single time that the state of Iowa passes a law, they'll say 25B.2 notwithstanding or other laws notwithstanding, so that they subvert the system that they do. And this most recent law that was passed called House File 718, they said exactly that. They said other laws notwithstanding. So they don't abide by the laws they pass, but they accept us to abide by the laws they pass. And so as we talk to our employees, they truly do recognize and understand. I mean, you heard for yourself in here that they're arguing on behalf of their employees.
Right.
I just would like everybody to understand that I think we've got great employees, and I argue on their behalf as well. But the term that I use, you heard me say it earlier, whatever I do for you, I have to be able to sustain. And if it's a decision that's not sustainable, I can't make that decision. And so that's where we operate from, is on the basis that we have, like every other family's budget, you have X amount of dollars coming in. If you exceed that money, you've either got to borrow or cut. And our mentality is we have to cut. And if we have to end up, for example, cutting services, I have right now, and this is just hypothetical, this is not anything that's under discussion or consideration, I'm just using as an example. I have seven maintainer routes that have between 80 and 100 miles on a route. If I have to cut services, if I have to eliminate an employee, I cut a maintainer route. I put those miles in the other 6 routes. But what that means is that, yeah, the taxpayer is going to save $100,000 a year, but it's going to be a lot longer to get to his driveway to be able to plow, because now my maintainer operators have got an additional 20, 25 miles that they've got to clear. And a maintainer moving snow at 8 miles an hour takes a long time to get 120 miles.
I bet it does.
Bladed.
I bet it does.
And that's only one pass, by the way. That's not going up and down so cars can go both directions.
So then you're basically doubling the distance.
Exactly right. And our folks do a great job. You heard our engineers say they were out at 5 o'clock this morning, making sure that roads were clear and not slick and whatnot, any drifts or anything that might have occurred. They're a great crew. And we're not looking at eliminating anything. What I'm simply saying is that when you want to reduce your costs, it usually means you reduce your services. Same thing with the ambulance. I have people that, a hospital expects us to be able to take transfers out of the hospital, and we do.
Mm-hmm.
But if we ended up having to cut and only become a 911 service, they're going to have to figure out a way to transfer those folks by some other means.
Right.
Those are services that we don't want to reduce, but you can only eliminate so much within the, I explained to you earlier about contributing to the crisis center and contributing to senior center, contributing to this. We can cut those, but those are small dollar amounts. I can cut 10 entities like that and only save $50,000, $60,000. So when you're operating at a deficit of $390,000 a year because your outgo exceeds your revenue because of the restrictions that the state has put on us,
mm-hmm.
we have to be very judicious in where we go with that money. And a lot of times, more times than not, your employees pay that price because that's where your significant cost increases
mm-hmm.
are at. And so can I eliminate health insurance or put the entire cost burden on the employee? Yeah, I can. But that only affects one fund, as you and I talked about earlier. Right. And that fund's not restricted. But, so we're looking at next year, not this current fiscal year that we're budgeting for, but the next one. This would be 25, 26. I'm talking 26, 27. We're looking at cutting 45 cents on the debt levy, which is about $450,000 a year, $500,000 a year in property tax reduction. But when you spread that over the entire county,
mm-hmm.
it doesn't amount to much for each individual taxpayer.
And then what is given up by doing that?
Well, that on the debt levy, we're not giving up anything because that's debt that we paid off.
Okay.
So we no longer have to collect that money to pay that debt.
Okay. Which is a good thing.
Right. And so we're currently, we have about, $3.5, $4 million of debt, if that much. And we borrowed $6 million to pave Germanville Road, Brookville Road, Vetch Boulevard, Packwood Road south of Brookville, and Pleasant Plain Road.
I was on Pleasant Plain Road today, and there's a fine road.
Yeah, and so those things needed to be done. Germanville, in particular, was terribly unsafe road. And one of the things that we've done over the years, right, wrong, or indifferent, is we've used a lot of spit, chewing gum, and balun wire.
Okay.
And so we try to get by and be conservative. We have a $4.5 million roughly road budget to take care of 800 miles of road and 150 plus bridges.
Wow.
And when you keep in mind that your payroll runs about $150,000 a month, you're seeing that you really only have about $3 million in road budget money. So we use farm to market money, and we use what's called STP funds, which is federal dollar service transportation project funds. Those require 80% or require 20% match in most cases. And so we have to, unlike your urban environments like Polk County and Scott County and Lynn County and all of those, we don't have the commercial options, let's say, that they do. Even in Washington County, for example, that has a casino that helps their bottom line. We don't have that luxury. And so when it costs $1 million to do a 3-inch overlay from the edge of Fairfield out to Cambridge on Pleasant Plain Road, and you got a $3 million budget, you have to rely on funds from other places. Now, our STP funds are what we do, what's called programmed. And so we only get so much money a year, and we let that money build up so that we can use that in one fell swoop, if you will, rather than trying to piecemeal things. We're allowed so much farm to market money each year by the state. But anytime you use state dollars, I'll give you an example. In this case, I'll go back. Federal dollars. Pleasant Plain Road, you come into Pleasant Plain Road, you notice the guardrails.
Yeah.
Okay. We used federal dollars to pave that road. But because we use federal dollars, some pinhead in Washington, D.C. that's never seen Pleasant Plain Road, but said the slope of the ditch was too much, we had to put in guardrails. That cost us an extra $67,000. And I don't know how many times we've had to replace those guardrails, because you can't get a combine and a car past each other where those guardrails are at.
And the combine's going to win.
And the combine's going to win. And so the same thing when we use state dollars, the state puts all these design requirements on the road that we wouldn't normally have to do if we weren't using state dollars. When we looked potentially at paving Nutmeg, if we'd have just paved it and not used any state money, we could have done it for literally about half of what it cost us if we used state money.
Wow.
And so these are factors that we have to take into play. But if we play the game, then, for example, on Nutmeg, we can use what was called RISE grant money to help pay for the road, because it was a commercial thing. That's where Heartland Co-op is. And because there was employees and stuff involved, yeah, you can get some RISE grant money to pay for half the road. And so there are trade-offs.
So you got to be on the hunt for that all the time.
All the time. And our engineer does a great job of that. You heard him say earlier today about contacting United States Congresswoman Miller Meeks because we have a grant that's been approved, but it hasn't been funded to do Lindby. And we're just like wanting to know, given the processes that the federal government is going through right now, looking at fraud and waste, which clearly needs to be done, we aren't sure whether or not some of those grants might be on the chopping block.
Right.
I would hate to see it happen, but I at the same time, I would understand why it happens.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, everybody, when you ask them, before we even heard the term Doge, wanted government spending to be down, and
right.
spending on what some people would call frivolous and others would think it's the most important thing in the world.
Yep.
We all wanted that taken care of. And now that it's happening, there's a lot of people yelling.
Yep.
And I mean, there's a lot of memes on social media out there that say the ones that are yelling are the ones that are doing it. And then they're anything in between. So
it's just like, yeah, you need a new jail. Yeah, we need a new jail. Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll put it in your backyard, but not in my backyard.
Those are NIMBYs.
Yeah.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah. And that's the mentality, and I understand it. And I readily admit, when you're spending $50 million on comic books, it's problematic for me.
And not just comic books, but transgender comic
right.
books. I mean, if it was a good superhero,
well, that might be,
with truth, justice, and the American way, you got my attention. But when you get all this other goofy stuff going on,
well, and so the issue is that in this instance, for example, the grant for the paving of that road, is it absolutely necessary? No, there's other processes that we can use. Mm-hmm. So the question is a balance between what's necessary and what's doable.
You know, just saying what's doable and necessary. I mean, if you just do what you need to get by, and then you find out you have the grant, then you probably
Right.
spend more money than you would have.
That's exactly right. And I mentioned earlier, we never spend all of the revenue that we take in. Never have. We have ending fund balances, and the reason for that is that we are constantly cognizant of the potential for emergency situations to arise. And if we spent every dime that we have and an emergency arises, we don't have the funds to do so. So we generally have around 20%, 25% of our total budget in reserve.
Wow.
Just
think of the federal government could do that.
Well, and that's, it is a philosophy that has been, I'm in my fourth term. I've served 14 years as a supervisor, and during my 14 years, that has always been our goal collectively as a board of supervisors, is to be conservative on our expenditures. Sometimes we do things and we look at things that the general public might not necessarily see as beneficial or necessary. We spent, I don't know, around $100,000 here a couple of years ago to tuck point the courthouse. People wonder, well, it's not something that the average person walking up the sidewalk to come into the courthouse would see any difference in what a before or after picture. But there definitely was a difference. And so that is a maintenance thing that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you walk through this courthouse, when this, right here in this office was completely remodeled, all new wiring put in, because we had the knot and tube wiring and stuff in here. And so that debt that we're paying off, that we're eliminating that debt levy next year, was the money that we spent to renovate the courtroom, the courthouse, to remodel all the offices, bring it up to date. All of those things, while at the same time cognizant of its history and maintaining the esoteric picture that this courthouse is and was. Some folks said, and I get it, some folks said, well, you spent $600,000 on this course. Well, actually, it was about $500,000 because we spent $100,000 on an ambulance. So $500,000 on the courthouse. That's a waste of money on a building that old. Well, first off, you couldn't build a building anywhere close to this for $500,000. Secondly, where would you build the building? It would have to be out of town, which is inconvenient. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, 3-foot thick walls. A historic building that it's incomprehensible that you would tear this building down or leave it sit here and fall into ruin and not use. Can we use more space? Sure. We renovated the building across the street. That's where our county attorney is housed. We look at taxpayer funds very judiciously and try to use them in the best way possible to the old saying, get the best bang for your buck. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes not so much, but it's not for lack of trying. And I just think that I would encourage anybody to come in and talk to us and ask questions. They can Zoom our meetings. They can reach out to Abby in the auditor's office, 472-2840, and get on the email list for the agenda. It gives the link for the Zoom. We love to have people here. We're not trying to hide anything or do things in the dark of night. Far be it from that. We love to have news media here. If I understand correctly, you may be here quite frequently, which I appreciate.
I've had several of my audience say, hey, we'd sure like you to cover some stuff in Jefferson County. So I thought today was a great opportunity just to start at a Board of Supervisors meeting.
Well,
and I really appreciate this opportunity to have the one-on-one conversation with you.
Well, I enjoy it. Nobody can ever accuse me of not being able to talk, but I do. I enjoy it. I have zero problem answering questions, but I will tell you that I won't always give you the answer you want to hear. I'll give you the truth, at least as far as I know it. But I also will, if I'm wrong, I'll admit that I'm wrong. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, but I'll tell you that I'll find out the answer. And there's a lot of things I don't know. And I've been doing this long enough to know that the amount that I know is a whole lot less than the amount I don't know.
There you go.
And so,
well, that's the way it should be for all of us. And I mean, we don't know what we don't know. And until we ask questions and learn, we'll never know.
Right. We fight with legislators, and I mean that figuratively speaking. They have a different agenda sometimes than what we have. And I understand it. Just like our department head that was in here today, advocating on behalf of his folks. Okay. And he and I having a different point of view, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Same, I advocate on behalf of my county to my state legislators, and we have a different point of view on how things need to proceed or can proceed.
You know, and I look at that, and I could tell that he was pretty judicious with his budget.
Yeah.
And I would think someone in that position, he's shown, he's tried, he's listened to his employees. They know he went to bat for them, but he also knows that you've got a budget that you've got to work with, and he's got a budget too. And you know, the number that they want and that he would like may not be able to be achieved this year, but something will work that will, I would think, that would appease people. And a lot of times they look at the amenities they have in the situation they're at, where they might not have in the private sector or in a different government capacity, and a lot of times things will work out.
Well, and I think you mentioned the amenities, and that's true. That the single employee does not pay for their health insurance. They pay for family coverage, but the individual does not pay for their health insurance. And I'm not advocating that that's an end all to end all. And you're 100% right. That department head, all our department heads, but that department head is phenomenal, and he does a tremendous job. And as he indicated in communications that he had with us, that he had some options at his disposal. And you heard me say, you can exercise those options and you can make it work, but this is what I'm going to appropriate.
Right.
And so, you know, it's a tough call on both parts, but he's honest, he's sincere, he does a phenomenal job, and his board is his board, the conservation board, has been together for years, and that's a testament to the director, to the board, to their dedication to the county. And when I say I wouldn't expect anything less, it's because of that dedication and their effort and the things that they put forward. I've come to expect that. And
he wouldn't want it any other way.
No, and I do not disagree with anything that he said, except we have to approach it from a different perspective.
Well, one of the things that you said before we started rolling the camera, and we had a great conversation before we started rolling the camera. I said, "Can I roll the camera?" And you said, "Sure," but you said, "Walk a mile in my shoes."
Right.
And that's, you know, if we all walked a mile in each other's shoes, we'd all have a totally different perspective on things. So
and you know, it's I cannot emphasize enough to the people that will see this, and hopefully even some of our employees may see it. We have the best employees in the state, as far as I'm concerned, bar none, and they're very dedicated. And if I could cut a blank check, I would cut a blank check. But I don't have that option, and I have to try and fit things into a kind of a round peg in a square hole sort of thing.
Right.
And but I support our conservation director 150%. And if he can make it work based on what we're going to appropriate, far be it from me to say no.
All right. Well, at that point, after that statement, we're at 37 minutes and 52 seconds of podcast excellence.
All right.
Let's wrap it up here, but I sure would like to have you back on sometime.
Anytime.
Thanks, Lee.
And our meetings are Monday mornings at 8:30. Please come.
All right. Thank you once again to Lee Dimmitt for his time today and his take and observations from his shoes. And he encourages you to attend the Board of Supervisors meetings or watch them via Zoom. I'm going to try and cover events and things as I can here in Jefferson County and in Fairfield. I thank you for watching. And if you like this episode, make sure to give it a like, follow, and subscribe. It's free. Thanks again for watching, and thanks to my sponsors, Griner Auto Body, Car Doctor, McDonald Boneyard, Hinshaw Trailer Sales, Girling Repair, B&B Propane and the family of Jet Stops, the Dutch Market, and Coffee Talk. I'm your host, John Bain. Stay friendly, Southeast Iowa.